Hello, hello, hello. Hey, guys and gals and humans of the world. Welcome to our winter edition. It is very snowy here in Minnesota today. In fact, we're having just like a little bit of a snow day today. I had to cancel some sessions because we're snowed in. It is cold. It's exciting. Welcome. I hope wherever you are, you're comfortable. Today, we have a very fun topic. I'll talk a little bit more about why we're doing this exact topic today, but it's something that I get asked a lot. We're talking about why fitness looks or how fitness should look different in our 40s, 50s, 60s, and beyond versus in our 20s. And you'll hear me say it again. It's a little bit of a cheeky answer, but this is a really fun topic because I think it's important for us. What spoiler for y'all on YouTube, what actually we're going to really discuss are the differences of what's going on mechanically, physiologically in those two different age ranges, right? Because our body is very different once we travel in perimenopause and beyond than it is in our reproductive years in our 20s. So there's going to be a lot of different changes, and that's going to show up in quite a different few ways in our training. So that is what today's topic is all about. Stick around. There's going to be a snow related joke today because, like I said, we're snowed in. So without further ado, I'm going to start the podcast over here. Grab a seat. If it's cold, grab a blankie and let's do this thing. Okay. Hello, 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 and welcome to the Fit After 40 Women's Fitness and Health Revolution podcast. Kinsey here, and as always, I am so delighted to be hanging out with all of you. Today's topic is a fun one because it's one that I have been thinking about doing a podcast on for a while, just because it's something that pops up all of the time when I have intakes with clients, when I am just chatting with people in general. And it's how is training / fitness in general different in our 40s, 50s, 60s, and beyond than when we're in our 20s and maybe even a little bit into our 30s. And surprise, surprise, if you've been around this podcast, the answer is going to be a little bit cheeky, but it's also going to be deeply informational. But first, I do want to give a huge shout out to everyone who reached out last week. I got some really great feedback about last week's GLP-1 episode, and I'm really happy to hear that it struck a chord with some of you enough to reach out. It always, always means the world when I get feedback from you. It gives me a heads up that we're covering things on this podcast that actually matter to you. So on that note, if there's anything that you would love to hear discussed in this podcast, questions about fitness, nutrition, menopause, whatever, you can go ahead, shoot me a DM on Instagram at kinsey.does.the.fitness, or you can hit me up in an email, kinsey@fitafter40.info. If you're watching on YouTube, hello, this is a new feature. We're doing every otherish week a live YouTube video. You can drop a question in the comment section. So reach out because, as always, chances are if you're wondering it, someone else is wondering it too. So on that note, I wanted to follow up after recording last week's podcast. Like I said, it was all about the World Health Organization and their decision on GLP-1s. As soon as I recorded that, I listened to a really interesting interview on the Dr. Mary Claire Haver podcast, Unpaused, with a triple board certified endocrinologist. She is a person who's been working with GLP-1s clinically for decades, back when it was used primarily just for diabetic patients. And I found their conversation, it's a 2-part episode, but the first part in particular really struck a chord with me based on everything that we talked about last week, which was really sort of asking the larger question of how did we get here with things like weight loss resistance. And their conversation was super valuable and really eye-opening. And was the first time that I really heard it sort of just talked about as matter of fact about what the history was, why we are where we are today, how we can use them in clinical practice, how there has to be a therapeutic dose. So I'm going to go ahead and share that link in the bio so that you can check that out. Again, the goal here is just to become more well-informed. And it's a super informational, like I said, no BS take on GLP-1s. Like I said, it's about their clinical use rather, and the truth behind weight loss resistance from someone who has been in the trenches in hospital settings for decades. Like I said, I found this speaker to be really interesting. She has a book coming out, so I'll definitely be diving into that. Because again, GLP-1s are not new, but in terms of their use in the capacity as a weight loss drug and helping with getting people down into their optimal body range where they're really in a place where their systems are able to function properly, right? So are physiologically healthy. We're not talking like getting snatched. We're talking about your healthy body range. We are going to see this more and more. And there was that uptick in 2023. So this was just a really good research source to inform yourself, especially if it's something that you've been wondering about, if you have talked about with a practitioner. Like I said, this really goes into depth. So check out the show notes there. Definitely worth a listen. It's a 2-part. I'm only putting the first part in. You'll be able to find the second part easy peasy. Okay. Well, that's enough about last week's episode. Let's talk about this week. So, Kinsey, how is training in my 40s, 50s, 60s, and beyond different than in my 20s? And I, as always, am so glad you asked. And the cheeky answer is, funnily enough, it shouldn't really look that different. Ideally, right, everybody is prioritizing strength training, at least 2 total body workouts weekly, ideally building to that 3 to 4 weekly sessions with additional focus on getting more movement in throughout our day, right? Hashtag neat is neat, that non-exercise activity thermogenesis. So with that whole like cheeky monkey answer aside, the real question to me is less about what's the difference between like what should we be doing different and focusing instead on what is different in our bodies when we're training in our 40s, 50s, 60s, and beyond, because the approach does have to pivot a little bit just because we are in a different phase of life. Things mechanically are moving a little different. Hormones are incredibly different, right? They're a big deal. They start to change. That's the whole thing we talk about with perimenopause, menopause, postmenopause, is that we're literally establishing a new hormonal profile than when we were in our pre-menstrual reproductive years. So this is one of the biggest reasons that I am now super passionate on the belief that every coach should be forced to take a course on menopause coaching, or even better, curriculums for personal training certifications would include menopause in their curriculum as a part of a larger whole. And then a person could take a menopause coaching certification as like a deep dive if they wanted. I was having a conversation with folks in a session this morning, and we were talking about how pelvic floor health isn't really even in a lot of the accredited programs. So like when I got certified in National Academy of Sports Medicine back in the day, they might have referenced it in the chapter on the core. I honestly can't remember, but it wasn't until I did my menopause coaching certification where they actually deep dove into the importance of pelvic floor health, especially as it pertains to a woman's life cycle. So shout out to Girls Gone Strong, because that was huge. And that's something that all of us deal with. So I would love to see a little reformation of education, but this is not because, for the record, that I think in any way women going through perimenopause transition are fragile or need to be coddled. Quite the opposite. Women have been braving hot flashes, mood swings, brain fog, insomnia, debilitating fatigue, aching joints and muscles, just to name a few, for as long as our lifespan has extended past 40 years of age, right? Oftentimes, these women find themselves suffering in silence, coming up against like a condescending pat on the head and a welcome to being a woman. So I'm not only passionate about working with women in menopause because they need help. I'm not passionate about helping them fix anything, right? Because they don't need to fix anything. Your body's doing exactly what it's supposed to be doing naturally. I'm passionate about helping them know what the H is going on in their bodies and letting them know and helping educate them that there are actions to support themselves through this tumultuous time. Because when we have more information and we have more resources available to us, should we choose to use them, it really frees up a lot of mental and even physical energy to get back to kicking booty in this amazing transition, right? So that's why we're doing this. Education so that we can make decisions for ourselves. And even more important to me is to get on the other side of this menopausal transition stronger and sharper than when we even started it. So to me, frailty is not an option, and avoiding it all starts with that education piece. So again, we are informed and ready to make those decisions for ourselves. So let's dive in. Differences between our 20s and our 40s, 50s, 60s, and beyond. So, hormones, right? Just thinking about estrogen alone, just one little sex hormone. Think of all the things we've talked about on this podcast that estrogen helps and protects us with during our reproductive years, specifically estradiol, which is linked to that menstrual cycle. It helps us with bone density, muscle strength and power, mobility, lubrication of joints, brain health, heart protection. These are just a few, and they're pretty major factors in our health overall, but especially when it comes to training. So, when we head into our training in our 40s, 50s, and 60s, one other thing we need to do is really reassess our priorities, reassess our goals, what's driving us to take time out of our busy lives to show up in the studio or show up in our home gym and work out. With women losing 8 to 15% of their muscle mass in perimenopause transition alone, and then 1 to 2% of their muscle mass every year after that until forever, and then like even a sharper decline once we hit 70, we gotta focus on that building and maintaining muscle. And that's nothing new here. That's the whole point of this podcast, right? But we need to really dial in our training to make sure that we are especially prioritizing muscle gain, muscle build in this critical time, because that is going to be the thing that makes or breaks a lot of our health, our vitality, our independence going forward. The more muscle we have on our frame, the better set we are, the more bulletproof our bodies and brains are for healthy, vital aging. And that's something that we can do at any age, right? So we'll talk about this in a second. It's not as easy in your 60s to build muscle as it is in your 20s, but it's possible to. And it's important that we are really making sure that we are prioritizing that muscle build first and foremost. Also, with falls happening to 1 in 4 adults over the age of 65 every year, with a 20 to 30% chance of hip fractures resulting in death within the year, stabilization is another non-negotiable focus when it comes to training post 40s. Again, we're going to talk about this a lot. Some of the shifts that happen when we're in this timeline are hormonal related, and then other things are just age related. Aging is inevitable, right? Erin Hull, my girl, she calls aging a privilege, and it is. One of the things mechanically that shifts is that balance. Proprioception becomes harder as we age. That's just a natural mechanism that starts to slow down and get a little discombobulated. So we need to actively train it, use it or lose it, right? We also want to make sure that we're prioritizing mobility. According to the Mobility, Bone, and Joint Institute, estrogen helps maintain joint health by reducing inflammation and keeping cartilage strong and flexible. So when estrogen levels drop in this menopausal transition, joints become more prone to inflammation, leading to stiffness, discomfort, and conditions such as osteoarthritis. This hormonal shift can also affect the production of synovial fluid. That's the fluid that acts as a lubricant for our joints, making movement feel more difficult and less smooth. Increasing synovial joint for lubrication, strengthening supporting muscles for better joint stability, reducing stiffness through stretching, and improving range of motion, counteracting inflammation. These are all benefits of mobility practice. So this is another, yet again, move it or lose it situation. Actually, as a perk this month for my Fit After 40 small group personal training members, we're going to start doing mobility Sundays. Because it's cold outside. And I don't know about you, but when the weather gets cold, my body suddenly feels like it's made out of metal. And I'm just like the creakiest human, even when I'm mobilizing. But B, I was reminded after I had one session last month where I finished with a yoga finisher. And I was reminded after doing that about how hard it is to self-motivate mobility on our own. I ran them through just like a 15-minute flow that prioritized little hip opening. We got into the hip flexor. We got into the hamstring. We did some hip circles. And there were all these groans coming out during the hip openers. And it was a lot of like, oh, I need to do more of this. And I can't touch my toes. And all these things where like the amount of times that I've heard in sessions, like, I really should do more flexibility. And then I'll check in the following week and be like, hey, did you incorporate a flexibility practice? Generally, the answer is no, not yet. It's hard to build lots of different lifestyle pieces all at once, right? That's why we always talk about choosing one lever. So for everyone in this cohort, their lever they're pulling right now is focusing on 2 to 3 strength training sessions a week. So I'm not really expecting them to make more mental space for stretching. So to help out, I'm going to add in that free class for them where we're going to mobilize for about 20 to 30 minutes. It's also going to help me out because I really like to mobilize with others. If you are in the Twin Cities and you're interested, we do actually have 2 spots left in our Fit After 40 small group personal training sessions. Or if you're someone who's looking forward to getting started in the new year, I am opening up 2 new cohorts. I haven't totally solidified the time, but if you're interested in being on the wait list, go ahead and check out the link in the bio, pop on that. Totally commitment free. When it does open, if you're on the wait list, you get a fat waitlist discount and you get first access to those cohorts. Remember, we cap the classes at 5 people so that we can really work on form and keep it individualized across the group. But in the meantime, even if you don't decide to join us during that cohort, there's going to be a lot of free resources coming your way via the newsletter in the meantime. But the truth of the matter is that we absolutely need to be warming up and cooling down before every workout. We have to, especially, not even just especially, always. But a lot of times, like I think about my clients who used to run and then they injure themselves. When you think about what they're doing during the day before their run, they're either getting up out of a desk where they've been seated and their hip flexors have been in a tightened situation and then just going right on their run, or they've been in bed and their muscles have been sleeping, right? Same with strength training. We need to warm up, lubricate those joints. Again, estrogen when we were in our 20s and early 30s was a huge protector of joint mobility and lubrication. As we get older, one of the things we have to do is extra warm up because we have to work a little bit longer to bring those muscles, joints, or ligaments, tendons online before we go into heavier lifting. That's how we're going to keep ourselves from getting injured. But even with warm-ups and cooldowns, it's not quite enough when it comes to mobility practice in general. It definitely is beneficial to add some sort of mobility practice. Again, I'm a big fan of, as you know, looking at health over a lifetime. So figure out what works for you. But a big rule of thumb is start slow with mobility. Remember, stretching should never hurt. We're looking at like 50% of a stretch. So if you're like in a hamstring stretch, let's say, and it's so tight that you're like, oh, there it is. Yep, I feel it. And you're kind of like holding your breath. If we're holding our breath and we're not able to breathe, stretching is a nervous system response. It is the muscle sending information to our brain that it is tight, and then it is the brain responding to the muscle and releasing. If we're actively going super duper tight, our body is going to register it as work, and we can actually even overstretch. So think 50%, just enough to feel it. Hold for 30 seconds, breathe deeply, enjoy. Also, stretching shouldn't hurt. This should be something that's very gentle. It should feel very lovely. Almost like a flushing and a rinsing of the muscles. So start gentle, enjoy yourself. Shouldn't hurt. Be able to breathe nice and easy. And I'm not talking about like 20 to 60 minutes a day. If you have the time, that's amazing. I love that for you. But honestly, for me, I think I've talked about it before. I go in and out of periods where I'm really good about, quote unquote, good about it. I can do like a 10 or 20-minute yoga class every single day. Right now, I'm in my era where I, at most, can like do a 5-minute routine before bed. But you know what? As I always say, something's better than nothing. And it really has helped putting that back into my schedule. So even if it's just a couple minutes, a couple times a week, get started with something. I promise you'll feel a lot better. Gentle mobility, a little at a time, will go a long way. Would it be wonderful to start focusing on all of these priorities ASAP in our 20s? And shoot, like even in our teens. So if we started 20s and like 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, etc., I can count you proud. If we've prioritized strength training, balance, and mobility, it sure would. Because the sooner you get started on all these things, the better suited we are headed into our perimenopause transition. And 2 of the big reasons, we'll talk about it in a second, but I do want to just emphasize it's never too late to get started, right? Best time to get started was 20 years ago. Second best time to get started was today. Shout out Stephanie Estima. But if you do have kiddos who are coming up, this is something that is a thing to consider. We create a muscle memory. There are studies that link children who were active to having healthier, more active bodies and lifestyles down the road. Not always, but it is. We create our satellite cell. It's anyway. I didn't pull up the the research on this, so I'm not going to quote it. But the point is, the sooner we get started, the better. A, because we're actually changing physiologically, and B, we're creating healthy habits, which is also why, if we do have little ones, thinking about how to approach healthy things in a healthy, manageable, realistic way. So, the two reasons it's easier to get started with these two things in our 20s. One, we talked about this already, but gaining muscle is significantly slower in our 40s, 50s, 60s than it is in our 20s. And it is less forgiving. Our bodies are quote unquote less forgiving when we lean into like the more unhealthy habits. So like some of us in our 20s maybe ate McDonald's for every single meal and or 7-Eleven snacks. Who, me? Yes. Yes, I did. And after I stopped, man, it was amazing how much better I felt just eating real food. But the point is, we have a little bit, it's a lot harder for us to gain muscle. We're losing muscle actively. So that's kind of the two part. And our body is more responsive to the unhealthy choices than it was in our 20s. Some of this is hormone related with the decline of estrogen, but some of it's simply the slowing of mechanisms as we age, like our ability to utilize protein efficiently. We referenced a study a little while ago about when they were looking at protein consumption to stimulate muscle protein synthesis for participants in their 70s. They needed twice the amount. They needed 40 grams of protein to the 20 grams of protein a 20-year-old needed to stimulate that muscle protein synthesis. So certain mechanisms just start to slow down. They don't uptake nutrients as efficiently. Some of it is the accumulation of inflammation over a lifetime. Think like lifetime of work and family stress, maybe McDonald's for every meal in your 20s and 30s, not to mention decades of environmental toxins. And when it comes to the conversation of metabolisms, interestingly, one of the biggest myths about aging that's spread is that our metabolism slows as we age. And the truth is that at least until like our 60s and 70s, our metabolism itself doesn't just start to like inherently slow down. It's a combination of lifestyle related things, age related muscle loss. If we don't have the appropriate lifestyle to build and maintain muscle, thinking lifting weights, eating adequate protein and robust nutrition. We talk about it on this podcast all the time, but remember, it's always worth repeating that muscle is our most calorically expensive tissue. When we have more muscle on our frame, we burn more calories at rest, right? It increases our BMR, which is the amount of energy it takes just for our body to exist during the day. So as we lose muscle, we burn less and less calories at rest. So that BMR just naturally starts to decline. Another major thing that happens as we get older is that the majority of us just start to move less and less. We get sedentary jobs, we stop playing, we feel too tired to go on walks, and slowly but surely, right, we just start to slow down and move less and less and less. Think about how much movement we got when we used to play as a kid, or even just like as a kid, right? We just messed around all the time. We were constantly on the go. If you have a kid, just watch them. They're just ripping across the room all day long. Even just on that day-to-day level of movement, we're getting so much less movement, right? The average American is getting at 3,500 steps a day. And this is another thing we talk about all the time, but NEAT, that non-exercise activity thermogenesis, aka everything we do during the day that isn't exercise, doing the dishes, walking the dog, feeding our dog, cleaning our dog, doing whatever our dog wants, whatever, anything. Maybe you don't have a dog and then it's anything else, right? Fidgeting, walking to the grocery store, all these things. These account for up to 30% of our caloric expenditure. Again, this is not all about calorie counting, but the point is it adds up. So if we're moving less, we're using way less energy because that's what calories are, right? At the end of the day, calories are just energy for our body. So those two things alone, continually less and less muscle, because remember, we lose muscle every year. in combination with less and less daily movement, less and less daily need, plus all the other things that we mentioned. Especially, I want to lean into that accumulation of inflammation when it comes to like stress and environmental factors. That is a big piece. I referenced that GLP-1 conversation on the unpaused workshop that I'm putting a link to. They talk a lot about environmental toxins and weight loss resistance. It's very fascinating. But those combinations, we have a lot less wiggle room when it comes to more consistent unhealthy choices in our 40s, 50s, and 60s. Our body doesn't bounce back the way it did when we were kiddos. Another reason that we need to prioritize planning our workouts and effectively planning our recovery, that includes both rest days and nutrition, is because as we get older, we need more recovery, right? Especially when we're starting out with a fitness program. And that's talking about recovery time between your workouts. It's also talking about recovery time getting into the studio post injury. So part of the success in midlife and beyond training is really, like I said, having a program that's built in a way that both prioritizes and utilizes active recovery, as well as creates workouts that manage to target and systematically progress the major movement patterns. So thinking squat, hinge, lunge, horizontal press, vertical press, pull, those those oldies but goodies, while also finding the balance of adequate rest and appropriate amount of weekly sets. So that's how many times that you're actively working a certain muscle group, which again is why I always say it really is beneficial to at least work with a personal trainer for a little while because there's a lot going on. And when you're first getting started, it can really help to have an expert help you sort of get a bird's eye view of here's where I want to go. What's a good way to get started? Bonus, help me with my form so I know I'm moving safely. Also, if you are coming in to fitness off of an injury, please, 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 always, always, always get clearance from a doctor. Personal trainers are not physical therapists. We have very different educational backgrounds. We can help to maintain feedback from your physical therapist. So a lot of times I will have clients who come in post injury or with an injury and they'll show me the exercises their physical therapist has given them. They'll give me information about the muscle or joint that they're working on. That way we can incorporate it into their workout. I know a list of contraindications and I know how to really help us focus on targeting the underactive muscles so that we can start to build strength in the areas that were a little bit weaker and that led to the injury in the first place. But to get that specific diagnosis, my client had to go to a physical therapist first. So get clearance from your doctor. And this is where taking into consideration who you're hiring can play a really big role. Consider working with a personal trainer who has experience working with people, especially midlife people coming off of the same or a similar injury. Because another big thing we've talked about here, I did a whole episode on how to find the right personal trainer for you, complete with questions to ask during your initial intake, is that there are a lot of really amazing, well-intentioned trainers out there, but not a lot of them have experience with more mature bodies that have lived a full life and have the aches, pains, scars, and limited mobility to prove it, right? And especially as we get older, that matters a lot more. We already talked about how estrogen is really supportive when it comes to lubrication and mobility in the joints. We also have to consider the fact that we lose bone mass as quickly as we do muscle mass. We want to make darn tootin' sure that we have a trainer who generally knows the phase our body is in and is giving us foundational training we need to build up that bone and muscle without putting us in injuries way, right? So this is spoken as someone who was a baby trainer at one point and made the mistake early on of training all of my clients the same way. Because at that time I was like, in order to get a good workout, we have to feel dead. So everyone's going to feel dead. And I trained my 40, 50-year-old clients the way that I trained my 20-year-old clients. And then I learned that everybody's body is different. And that was a huge part of my education. And I shout out a sorry to those who I worked with early on. But the point is that I didn't have the experience to know, especially as someone in a 20-year-old body, like even when I turned 35, I remember that was when I started just like waking up with like, oh, great, I hurt my shoulder from sleeping, right? I didn't, I just had no idea how different the body could feel. So I learned trial by error, but it is really worth getting a client who has worked with adults before so that they know everybody's body is different. They've worked with, at that point, probably a variety of injuries. Because once we get past a certain age, let's face it, everyone's probably had some sort of injury or debilitation, whether it's like low back pain or shoulder pain or a knee replacement, a hip replacement, an ACL tear, right? We live in our bodies. You can do all the things right, and we're probably at some point still going to injure ourselves just based on the fact that we're in a skeleton, same musculoskeletal system till the day we leave this planet. So it's just like a car. You can take all great care of it as you want, but every once in a while you're going to pop a tire or you're going to ding the edge. So that's totally normal. Just make sure you have a trainer who knows how to train it appropriately. Okay, went on a tangent there. Next up on what's different from then and now. Girl, external life stressors and responsibilities. This is not to say that there are not 20-year-olds who like legitimately have the weight of the world on their shoulders, right? This isn't even to judge stressors at any age. Stressors be stressors, period end. But for most of us, as our age increases, so too does our responsibility. This could be in the workplace. This could be in our own household. This could be in someone else's household, when we're helping out our aging and ailing parents. This could be dealing with the very real physiological stressors of the menopausal transition, or this could be a combination of a few or everything I just mentioned. There's a lot going on in midlife and beyond. And if you are like most women, this is not the first phase of your life where you're burning the candle at both ends. This comes on top of an entire 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, etc., of doing the most all the time. So it's been a lifetime of chronic stress. So we need to take into consideration that that is going to come into play in our workouts. And this can show up in a few different ways, right? We've talked about the hierarchy of health on this podcast before. One thing that we see in midlife a lot is insomnia or lack of quality sleep. Like maybe we sleep 8 hours, but we're up a lot during the night, or we don't really hit REM sleep and we wake up incredibly fatigued. Take your sleep into consideration before your workout. If a client comes to me and they say, hey, I slept 4 hours, I feel like trash, we're not going to fry their nervous system and throw them under a barbell, right? We might do lighter load lifting, or if this is like a run of insomnia, maybe we do a little bit of mobility and we call it a day. Be willing to be flexible with yourself because we have a lot going on. Stressors in general create systemic inflammation that can show up chronic fatigue, that can show up as HPA axis fatigue, also known as adrenal fatigue, that can show up as mineral deficiencies, that can show up as aches and pains in our joints, that can show up in tension, literally getting carried in different parts of our bodies. A lot of us carry tension in our shoulders, in our hips. And like I said too, all the things we've talked about, with that in mind, recovery is harder. We have less lubrication in our joints. It all kind of comes into play here when we're dealing with the stressors of life. So we just have to give ourselves a little grace. This is a really good phase of life, especially when we're in the menopausal transition, to say that some days showing up is good enough, right? Getting a workout in is good enough. Maybe it's not the best workout I've ever done. Maybe I didn't PR. Maybe I even kind of felt junky the whole time, but at least I did it and I listened to my body, right? So we need to take our feelings into more consideration than we're maybe used to. And this isn't to say that like you can't work out, right? It's just being mindful of where you're at and treating your body with care. There's always ways to work around how you're feeling. You can still get stronger even when we're going through some of the more intense menopausal symptoms. And again, that's why the hierarchy of health to me is really important. To me, sleep is the most important thing. So getting that in check. And if you need to pull back on your workouts for right now, like I always say, a little goes a long way. We really kind of have to be more flexible in this phase of life. Okay, the last little bit we're going to say is that remember, we've talked about bone health, we've talked about muscle health, all these things that start to just decline naturally with age and get an even like steeper decline when we talk about loss of estrogen. We also lose power. So when we're considering cardio, especially my generation right now that I'm training, starting with like me, my generation was really like cardio bunny, right? We've heard that phrase over and over again where it was hop on the treadmill, hop on the elliptical and go, 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 go. See how many calories you can burn. That's not gonna really help us. Cardio is great for heart health. Remember, you still can increase your heart health doing strength training as well. When we are doing cardio, though, we're really looking to maintain power. The way that we do that, we've talked about this before, is through HIIT training. I know, high intensity interval training, which is not what we maybe have the preconceived notion of it, because for a long time, HIIT group fitness classes were incorrectly labeled HIIT. Remember, we should not really be able to perform HIIT for longer than 10, 20, maybe 30 minutes. In Fit After 40, we're building up our HIIT capacity. Right now, we're doing 10 minutes, and it looks like this. 5 to 20 second all outs on an assault bike with 90 seconds to 2 minutes of recovery 4 to 5 times. And every month, we add another round on. You want just completely all out energy where you're doing something safe that you can take right to the edge. You're stimulating all the way up through that top fast twitch muscle. And then you give yourself enough recovery that you're completely recovered before you go again, because you want to be able to hit max capacity every time. That is what HIIT training is. There's a lot of conversations about zone 2. Dr. Stacey Sims will tell you that's not as important for women. If you like to run, if you like to run, keep doing it. Do it safely, please. Just don't do it at the expense of your strength training. Otherwise, if you don't like to run, great news, you don't have to. In fact, I would argue that you shouldn't really get started. I like to do HIIT training on assault bikes, on stationary bikes. If you know how to row, it can be really fun on rowers. So those are just elliptical machines, some things that are slightly safer and have your form more locked in. All right, team. So those are just some of the ways that training is, like I said, training in our 50s, 60s, 70s, beyond, in theory, should look similar to our 20s and 30s, because ideally we're prioritizing strength training and balance and mobility. However, today we talked about all the ways that the body is different in these decades than it is in our reproductive years, with the decline of estrogen, with the shifting of our hormonal profiles, but also just with the natural slowing of mechanisms that happen as we age. This isn't wrong. This isn't bad. We're not failing at anything. This is just a natural transition. So we just want to take these things into consideration, right? We want to work on our priorities. We want to make sure that we're giving ourselves adequate rest and we're giving ourselves adequate nutrition, because again, things like protein utilization gets harder or less efficient as we age, and that we're just being more mindful about our life as a total picture, that we're not being really hard on ourselves if we show up to our workout feeling like trash and only feel sort of okay. But if we pull out the lens, we realize we've been running our kids around to hockey practice, to soccer practice. We've been having to lead meetings for the full week. We've been at work until 10 p.m., right? We have all these life stressors that are going on outside. Of course, we feel like garbage. We're waking up with hot flashes. Really allow yourself to zoom out and see workouts not as your sole purpose in life right now, but as a piece of your puzzle. We are working out not to fix anything. We are working out just as a tiny piece of our overall health puzzle to help bulletproof our body and brain over a lifetime. And the great news is you can do that in as little as 2 to 3 hours a week, prioritizing strength training, trying to aim for one HIIT session at least to start. And like I said, really getting more of that non-exercise activity in during your day. And we've done a whole podcast on how to do that. So Without further ado, thank you so much for taking time to listen to this podcast. As always, if you have your own questions, definitely reach out to me. I would love to cover them on the podcast. If you enjoyed this podcast, please leave it a 5-star review and maybe even take time to write about it. We just got a new one and it's always my favorite. It means the world that you took the time. And in the meantime, we will be back next week with another delightful topic. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen. Take care of those beautiful brains and bodies. You are so stinking worth it. Aroo. All right, my YouTubers, you ready for this? I told you it was going to be a snow related. What falls in the winter but never gets hurt? What falls in the winter but never gets hurt? Did you say snow? Because if you did, you're right. All right, team, thank you so much for being here. Hopefully you got some stuff out of today's podcast. Like I said, if you have your own topics that you'd like covered, drop them in the comments. If you want access to all of the podcasts, I think this is like 68 or something, you can find it wherever podcasts are streamed. Also, every other podcast is going to be on YouTube. And eventually there is going to be a Patreon where you can see all of the podcasts on YouTube. Too. All right, y'all. I'm going to shut this down. I hope you have a beautiful day. And if you're in the snow, drive safely.